Why did the pilot stop walking when he saw her sleeve? The hangar was already alive with noise when it happened. Metal clanged. Boots echoed. Someone laughed too loudly near the tool racks. The Apache loomed overhead like a resting predator, its 30-millimeter chain gun hanging heavy and silent. And beneath it, almost swallowed by its shadow, she worked alone. Zephrine Thorne did not look up. She never did. Her sleeves were rolled just enough to keep sweat from pooling at her wrists. Her hands moved with careful precision, loosening a panel, setting each bolt in the same order she always used. Nothing rushed. Nothing wasted. She cleaned the weapon like it mattered, like someone's life would depend on it, because it would. Around her, people passed without seeing her. She had learned how to become that way, invisible, unremarkable, the kind of woman you step around without thinking, the kind you forget 5 seconds after you've walked past. It was safer that way. The pilot had been in a hurry. Major Tavish Blackwood moved like a man used to being late but never questioned for it. His helmet was tucked under his arm, his mind already on the briefing room. He would have walked past her like everyone else. Except something dark and worn caught his eye. Black and gold. His stride faltered, one step slowed, then another. His eyes locked on her upper arm where heat and habit had pulled her sleeve back just enough to betray her. The patch was old, faded, not decorative, not ceremonial. Classified. Blackwood stopped completely. For a moment he just stared. Then his breath left him in a quiet, almost embarrassed exhale. "That patch," he said, voice barely audible over the hangar noise. "That can't be real." Zephrine kept cleaning. Her fingers tightened once around the cloth, then relaxed. She gave a single nod. Not proud, not defensive. Just honest. Blackwood set his helmet down slowly like he was afraid a sudden sound might shatter something. His face had changed. Not fear, not awe. Recognition. "Eagle Talon," he whispered. "They said you were all dead." That was when she finally looked up. Her eyes were calm, older than they should have been, heavy with things no rank insignia could explain. Blackwood straightened without realizing it. "I won't say anything," he said quickly. "I swear." She didn't answer. She didn't need to. He picked up his helmet and walked away like a man leaving a church. And just like that, the hangar was no longer quiet. The whispers didn't start immediately. They crept in. A glance held too long. A conversation that stopped when she walked past. Veterans watching her hands instead of her face. Younger mechanics standing a little straighter without knowing why. Captain Reeve Calloway noticed last. He always did. To him, she was still just a technician, the quiet one, the background one, the one who never argued back. "Thorne," he said, clipboard tucked under his arm. "Colonel wants this bird ready by 1400. Don't screw it up." She had never screwed up a single time. But she only nodded. When he walked away, the heat rolled up her sleeve again. The patch showed. And the day began to change. By afternoon, the hangar felt different. Not louder, not busier. Sharper. A colonel she didn't recognize walked through the doors with 2 men who didn't wear unit patches at all. Military intelligence. The kind that watched exits more than people. Zephrine felt it before she saw it. Eyes on her back, calculating, measuring. She finished the reassembly slowly, deliberately, gave them time to decide what they were seeing. Colonel Mercer approached her like one might approach an unexploded device. "Lieutenant Colonel Thorne," he said at last. The hangar went silent. Someone dropped a wrench. She stood fully upright for the first time in months. "Yes, sir." The truth hit the room like a physical force. Eagle Talon, classified missions, a unit that officially never existed, a survivor who was never supposed to be alive. "Why are you here?" Mercer asked quietly. "Because dead women don't get asked questions," she said. and because someone here sold my team. That was the moment everything stopped being theoretical. She showed them the data she had been collecting for 7 months. Encrypted traffic, modified systems, patterns no one else had noticed because no one else had been looking that closely. She had chosen maintenance for a reason. Low rank, high access, no attention. Perfect cover. Obsidian hand, she said. They're closer than you think. The first explosion shook the north perimeter before anyone could respond. Alarm screamed, and the ghost everyone had ignored finally spoke loud enough to be heard. They're here for me, Zephyrin said calmly, and for what's inside this helicopter. By nightfall, the base was a fortress under siege. She moved through the chaos like she had never left it, issuing quiet instructions, adjusting defenses, watching faces instead of maps. Calloway found her near the flight line, as dawn began to creep into the sky. I treated you like you were nothing, he said. I didn't know. You weren't supposed to, she replied. Then she handed him responsibility. He took it without argument. Blackwood flew with her. The Apache lifted as missiles chased them into the morning light. The sky filled with warning tones and controlled breathing. She guided the weapons like memory, not skill. Some things never leave you. When the enemy helicopters fell away burning, she didn't celebrate. She just kept flying. 5 years hiding, 5 years waiting, 5 years of silence so thick it almost became comfort. As the sun rose higher, Zephyrin Thorne watched the desert stretch beneath them, endless and indifferent. Ends today, she whispered. And it did. Not with applause, not with speeches, but with truth delivered, sacrifices honored, and a woman who no longer needed to disappear. Because sometimes strength doesn't announce itself. It works quietly, it waits, it endures. And when the moment comes, it acts. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Why had she chosen to disappear instead of fight back? The question hung in the air long after the pilot walked away, even though no one had spoken it out loud. Zephyrin felt it in the way footsteps slowed near her, in the way conversations fractured when she passed, in the sudden, uncomfortable respect that didn't know where to stand. She kept cleaning. The chain gun was warm beneath her hands, not from use, but from the desert heat trapped inside the hangar. She welcomed the familiarity of it. Metal didn't ask questions. It didn't care who you used to be. It only cared whether you did the job right. Around her, the base continued pretending nothing had changed. That was the part that always came first, denial. Young mechanics still laughed too loud. A corporal complained about coffee that tasted like fuel. Someone argued about weekend rotations. Life tried to go on, stubborn and ordinary, as if the weight that had just entered the hangar could be ignored. Zephyrin knew better. She had seen this before, the moment before realization became fear. She finished the final inspection and logged the maintenance code. Her hands were steady, but something inside her tightened. Not panic, not doubt. Memory. The patch on her arm felt heavier now, like it was pulling her backward through time. 5 years earlier, she had worn it openly. Back then she hadn't cleaned weapons. She had carried them. She had led teams into places that never made maps. Cities erased by dust and politics. Compounds that didn't exist until they were burning. She remembered the weight of command, not the authority, but the responsibility. The knowledge that every decision echoed inside someone else's life. She remembered Samurand. The heat, the smell, the way the night went wrong without warning. They had been inserted quietly, clean, surgical, the kind of mission that ended before anyone knew it had begun. They had intelligence, confirmations, redundancies stacked on redundancies. Someone still sold them out. The ambush was precise, not chaotic, professional, the kind that came from people who knew exactly how Talon operated. She had been on point when the first shot landed. Everything after that blurred into movement and sound and instinct. She remembered dragging one of her team into cover, remembered screaming into a radio that only returned static, remembered the moment she realized extraction wasn't coming. She remembered waking up alone. 3 days later, she had buried them herself. She didn't remember crying, only the work. That was when she understood something most soldiers never had to learn. You don't always survive because you're stronger. Sometimes you survive because someone else needs you gone quietly. The hangar door opened again. This time the silence followed it. Colonel Mercer stepped inside with his aide and two men who moved like they belonged to shadows more than buildings. They didn't look at the Apache first. They looked at her. Zephyrin felt their attention like pressure on her spine. She didn't stop working. Mercer stood there longer than necessary, long enough for everyone nearby to pretend not to watch, long enough for the weight of rank and consequence to settle into the concrete. "Lieutenant Colonel Thorne," he said finally. She straightened slowly, not because she had to, because she chose to. "Yes, sir." The aide stiffened. One of the intelligence officers shifted his stance slightly, like he was adjusting to a new reality. "You were declared killed in action," Mercer said, "with full honors." "Yes, sir." "And yet here you are, enlisted as a technician, no record of protest, no appeal." She met his eyes. "I needed time," she said, "and I needed access." "To what?" She gestured toward the Apache without looking at it. "This base." A murmur ran through the hangar, not loud, controlled, the sound of people realizing they were standing inside something bigger than their pay grade. Mercer studied her for a long moment. "Why Vanguard?" "Because people transfer here thinking it's quiet," she replied, "and because quiet places attract the kind of mistakes no one is watching for." She didn't say betrayal. She didn't have to. One of the intelligence officers stepped forward. "You're suggesting a breach." "I'm statting it," Zephyrin said. "It started before you even broke ground." Mercer's jaw tightened. "You're accusing active duty personnel." "I'm accusing patterns," she corrected. "Personnel just happened to be part of them." She reached up and pulled her sleeve down deliberately. The patch disappeared. "Not as surrender. As restraint." "Permission to continue my work, sir," she said. "The Apache still isn't cleared." For a moment, Mercer looked like he might refuse. Then he nodded. "Finish," he said quietly. As he walked away, Zephyrin felt eyes on her from every angle. Respect, curiosity, fear, guilt. All of it familiar. She had lived among these emotions before. By late afternoon, the hangar had changed shape. Not physically, but emotionally. People spoke in half-sentences. Laughter sounded forced. Even the air felt heavier, like it was waiting for something to fall. Captain Calloway hovered near the tool station, clipboard forgotten. He watched her now, not with dismissal, but with something closer to uncertainty. She felt his attention but didn't turn. Let him sit with it. She finished calibrating the weapon system and moved toward the avionics panel. Her fingers danced across controls no technician should know how to access. No alarms triggered. No warnings appeared. Because she had designed contingencies for years. Behind her, someone inhaled sharply. She didn't look back. Dusk crept into the hangar, bleeding orange through the high windows. The shadows stretched longer, thinner, sharper, the kind of light that made everything look temporary. That was when she noticed the military police. 2 of them at the entrance, not casual, not passing through. Watching. Her jaw tightened. So the quiet was already ending. She packed her tools carefully, slower than usual, not out of hesitation, out of calculation. She glanced once toward the exit, then back to the Apache. If they came now, it would be messy. She didn't want that. Not yet. As she snapped the final latch closed, Mercer's aide returned at a brisk pace. He leaned in and whispered something that made the colonel stop walking mid-step. Mercer turned. This time, he didn't keep his distance. "Confirmed," he said, voice low. "Pentagon verified everything." The hangar froze. "You shouldn't be here," Mercer added. "Not like this." She met his gaze steadily. "Neither should the people who sold my team," she said. "But here we are." A pause stretched between them. "How long have you known?" Mercer asked. 7 months, she replied. 4 days if you count confirmation. "And you didn't report it." She shook her head. "I watched it." Mercer exhaled slowly. "They're still here." "Yes, sir." "Do they know you're alive?" She glanced at the patch beneath her sleeve. "They do now." The first explosion came seconds later. Not close enough to feel. Close enough to hear. The base sirens followed almost immediately, slicing through the evening air. Red lights flickered. Voices rose. Mercer straightened. "Battle stations," he barked into his radio. "This is not a drill." Zephyrin didn't move. Not until she heard the second explosion. Closer. Her breathing slowed. This was the moment she had been preparing for without admitting it. Blackwood appeared beside her, helmet in hand. "They hit the north perimeter," he said. "Coordinated, clean." She nodded. "Obsidian," she said. "They don't waste noise." "Are they here for the base?" "No," she replied. "They're here for me, and the data I've been hiding in that helicopter." Blackwood hesitated. "How many?" "At least 20, she said. "Former special forces, contractors who forgot what side they were on." He looked toward the Apache, then back at her. "You can't do this alone." She finally allowed herself to look tired. "I never have," she said. "I just learned to do it quietly." The hangar shook again. This time closer still. Zephyrin reached into her toolbox and lifted the false panel. The past stared back at her. A sidearm, a blade, familiar weight. She closed her hand around them, not with relief, but with acceptance. 5 years of hiding hadn't made her weaker. It had made her precise. As she stepped toward the Apache, alarms wailing and boots pounding around her, Zephyrin Thorne understood something she hadn't before. Disappearing had never been about fear. It had been about patience. And patience, she knew, was a weapon. Sometimes the strongest move isn't a fight. It's to wait long enough that, when you do, there's no doubt left about why. How do you prepare to become visible again, when surviving depended on being forgotten? The night didn't fall so much as it collapsed. One moment, dusk still clung to the edges of the hangar. The next, the base was swallowed by alarm lights and shouted commands, red strobes cutting the darkness into fragments. Zephyrin stood in the middle of it, perfectly still, as if motion itself needed permission. This was the moment she had delayed for years. Not because she feared it, but because she respected it. Around her the base scrambled. Boots hammered concrete. Radios crackled with overlapping orders. Someone yelled for medical. Someone else swore loudly and kept running. Fear didn't announce itself. It leaked into voices, into rushed movements, into hands that shook just slightly as they loaded magazines. Zephyrin noticed all of it. She always did. Major Blackwood moved beside her, helmet clipped now, eyes scanning. "They breached the outer fence," he said. "South and west, coordinated." She nodded. "They want the hangar intact." "You sound sure." "They always do," she replied. "Proof is more valuable than bodies." She reached the Apache and placed one hand on its frame, grounding herself. This aircraft had been her confessional for months. The place where she had hidden fragments of her past, inside lines of code and hardware adjustments no one else thought to question. A technician ran up, breathless. "Ma'am, we've got perimeter casualties." "Stabilize them and fall back," Zephyrin said calmly. "Don't chase, don't improvise." The technician hesitated only a second before nodding and sprinting away. Blackwood watched her carefully. "They're listening to you." "They always listen when the noise gets loud enough," she said. A burst of gunfire echoed from the far end of the base. Not random, disciplined, controlled. Obsidian hand. They moved like soldiers but thought like accountants. Efficiency, cost-benefit, minimal waste, maximum leverage. Zephyrin had studied them longer than they realized. She climbed into the Apache's cockpit with Blackwood, the familiar smell of electronics and hydraulic fluid settling around her like an old uniform. As she strapped in, her fingers brushed the edge of the black and gold patch secured to her gear. She didn't look at it. "Not yet." "Tower, this is Ghost One," Blackwood said into the radio, requesting immediate clearance. Static answered, then Mercer's voice cut through. "Ghost One, you're cleared. Get that data out of here." No speeches, no encouragement. Just trust. The rotors began to turn. The vibration traveled up through her boots into her bones. She had missed this, not the flying, but the focus. The way the world narrowed into manageable pieces. Inputs, outputs, decisions that mattered immediately. As they lifted, Zephyrin watched the base from above. Fires burned in controlled lines. Defensive positions held barely. She could see enemy movement, dark shapes advancing where they shouldn't be, too organized to be insurgents, too confident to be random. "They're better than last time," Blackwood muttered. "They learn," she said, "so do we." A warning tone screamed through the cockpit. "Missile lock," Blackwood said evenly, "deploying countermeasures." The Apache bucked as flares streaked into the night. A bloom of fire erupted behind them, far enough away to be safe. Zephyrin exhaled slowly. "Second contact," she said, eyes locked on the targeting display. "Unmarked helicopter, east approach." Blackwood swore softly. They brought air support this time. She adjusted the weapon system with muscle memory older than her cover identity. Her hands didn't shake. Her heart didn't race. This wasn't adrenaline. This was alignment. "They're testing us," she said, "seeing if we run." "Do we?" Blackwood asked. She looked at him. "No." The Apache pivoted smoothly. The enemy helicopter tried to veer off, but too late. Zephyrin locked on and fired. The sky flashed white, then orange. Silence followed. The second helicopter pulled away, retreating fast. "They'll regroup," Blackwood said. "They always do," Zephyrin replied. "That's fine." She activated the modified Hawkeye system. Streams of encrypted data flooded the screen, patterns she had been building for months now snapping into place. "This is everything," she said quietly. "Their networks, their payments, their buyers." "You're ending them," Blackwood said. "No," she corrected. "I'm exposing them." There was a difference. As they flew, her thoughts drifted, not backward but inward. She thought about the months she had eaten alone, the jokes she hadn't answered, the insults she'd absorbed because they were lighter than suspicion. She had been ignored. And in that space she had listened. She thought about Calloway's face when he realized what he had dismissed. Not anger, not triumph. Just understanding. That was enough. A sudden jolt shook the helicopter. "Hit?" Blackwood asked. "Close," she said. "Ground fire, they're desperate now." She keyed the radio. "Mercer, they're escalating. Expect secondary breach attempts. They know they're losing leverage." "Copy," Mercer replied. "Reinforcements are 25 out." Zephyrin looked at the data stream stabilizing. "We won't need them." She sent the first encrypted packet. It felt anticlimactic. No explosion, no fanfare, just confirmation. Transmission complete. Her chest tightened unexpectedly. Not relief. Grief. For the team that should have been here. For the years that couldn't be undone. For the life she had folded away so completely that sometimes she forgot it still belonged to her. Blackwood glanced at her. "You okay?" She nodded slowly. "I am now." The Apache turned back toward the base. Below them, obsidian forces began to withdraw, not in panic, in calculation, a business retreating from a bad investment. "They'll come for you again," Blackwood said. "Probably," she replied. "But not like this." As the first hint of dawn touched the horizon, Zephrine felt something unfamiliar settle inside her. Not victory. Closure. She had survived by becoming invisible. But she had ended it by being seen. Sometimes redemption doesn't arrive as forgiveness. Sometimes it arrives as truth. And truth, once released, doesn't need protection. It simply exists. What do you do after the fight ends, when the noise fades, and you're left alone with what you've become? The Apache touched down just as the first light of morning spread across the base. Not triumphant, not broken, just returning. The rotors slowed, kicking up dust that hung in the air longer than it should have, as if the ground itself wasn't ready to settle yet. Zephrine stayed seated a moment after the engines powered down. Not because she was tired, because silence can be louder than battle. Around them, soldiers emerged cautiously. Some moved with purpose, others with the stunned stiffness of people who hadn't expected to still be standing. Smoke drifted from a damaged storage building. Medics worked quietly nearby, their voices low and controlled. Blackwood climbed out first, scanning the perimeter. "They pulled back completely," he said. "No pursuit." She nodded and unstrapped herself. When her boots hit the ground, the reality of gravity returned. Weight, responsibility, consequence. People noticed her now. Not as a rumor, not as a patch. As a person. Colonel Mercer approached without urgency, his uniform marked by dust and exhaustion. He looked older than he had the day before. War did that quickly, even when it ended early. "The data reached CENTCOM," he said. "They're already scrambling." "Good," Zephrine replied. He studied her. "This won't stay classified." "No," she agreed, "it shouldn't." There was no celebration. No one cheered. That would have felt wrong. Instead, there was a strange reverence, the kind that comes after something fragile survives intact. Captain Calloway stood off to the side, watching her. He waited until Mercer moved on before approaching. His voice was quieter now, careful. "I've been thinking about what you said," he began, "about being invisible." She met his eyes without judgment. "I mistook quiet for weakness," he admitted. "Most people do," she said. "It makes them comfortable." He nodded once. "I won't make that mistake again." She believed him, not because he said it, but because he looked unsettled by the truth. Later, when the base had stabilized and the adrenaline had drained from the air, Zephrine found herself alone near the hangar entrance. The Apache rested behind her, scarred but functional. She ran a hand along its frame one last time. For months, it had been her cover. Now it was her proof. A young mechanic approached hesitantly, one of the ones who used to joke too loudly. He stopped a few feet away, unsure where to place his hands. "Ma'am," he said, I just wanted to say I didn't know." She smiled faintly. "You weren't meant to." He nodded, visibly relieved. As the sun climbed higher, the base began to look ordinary again. Temporary repairs, inventory checks, reports being written, life resuming its insistence on continuity. But Zephrine felt different. Not lighter. Clearer. Blackwood found her near the command building. "They're going to want statements, debriefs, probably a lot of questions you don't feel like answering." She exhaled slowly. "That's fair." "You don't have to stay," he added. She considered that. For years, staying hidden had been survival. Now staying visible felt like something else entirely. "I think I will," she said, "for a while." He smiled. "They could use you." "I know," she replied. "That's why I waited." As the day wore on, memories surfaced, not violently but persistently. Faces of her team, the quiet rituals she had built to remember them without drowning. She didn't feel guilt anymore. She felt resolve. That night she stood alone outside the hangar, the desert air cool against her skin. The patch rested openly on her shoulder, no longer a secret, no longer a burden. She looked up at the stars, distant, unmoved. Somewhere in the vastness, the truth she had released was spreading, consequences unfolding, justice taking shape slowly, imperfectly. That was enough. Zephrine Thorne had not returned to reclaim a name. She had returned to finish something. And in doing so, she had learned that strength doesn't demand attention. It endures quietly until the moment arrives. Then it stands, unapologetic, unhidden. And that is how the forgotten become undeniable. What happens when the mission is over, but the weight of it refuses to leave? The night after the attack was quieter than it should have been. No alarms, no engines, just the soft hum of generators and the occasional crunch of boots on gravel. Zephrine lay awake on a narrow cot in temporary quarters, staring at a ceiling that wasn't hers. The darkness pressed close, not threatening, just patient. This was the part no one trained you for. After the fight, after the urgency dissolved, when your body finally slowed down and your mind refused to follow. She closed her eyes and immediately saw Samurand again, not as fire or chaos but as stillness. Her team laughing softly before insertion, the way they had trusted the plan, trusted her. She exhaled sharply and sat up. The desert night was cool, clean, honest. She stepped outside and walked without direction, letting instinct guide her. It always had. The base looked different at night, less imposing, more human. Lights glowed in windows where people tried to rest. Somewhere, someone laughed softly, too softly for joy, too loud for grief. Zephrine paused near the edge of the flight line. She felt the familiar pull of responsibility, the quiet urge to check systems, to ensure readiness. Old habits didn't die, they waited. She resisted. Instead, she leaned against a low barrier and let the weight of everything settle. She had exposed Obsidian Hand. She had survived. And still, something inside her felt unfinished. Footsteps approached. Blackwood stopped beside her without speaking. He didn't ask if she was okay. He knew better than that. "They're moving fast," he said eventually. "Arrests, asset freezes, a lot of people very angry." She nodded. "Anger means it mattered. They'll want you in the spotlight. That's what worries me." He studied her profile. "You're not afraid of attention." She shook her head. "I'm afraid of what attention simplifies." He understood. Stories liked clean lines, heroes, villains, redemption arcs tied neatly with words like closure. Real life wasn't like that. Her team wouldn't come back because the truth came out. Her years hiding wouldn't rewind. Justice didn't erase loss. "Do you regret disappearing?" Blackwood asked quietly. She considered the question longer than he expected. "No," she said finally. "I regret that I had to." They stood in silence again. Later, alone once more, Zephrine returned to her quarters and opened a small, worn notebook. She had carried it for years across bases and borders. Inside were names, dates, fragments of thoughts she never let become sentences. She added one line. "Mission complete." The words felt strange. She closed the notebook and set it aside. Morning came gently. At dawn, Mercer summoned her, not with authority but with respect. They spoke about options, positions, futures that didn't involve hiding in plain sight. "You've earned whatever comes next," he told her. She listened, She didn't answer immediately. When she left the command building, she walked through the hangar one last time as a technician. Tools lined up, floors swept, a space that had protected her by ignoring her. She touched the workbench lightly. Gratitude didn't always look like pride. Sometimes it looked like acknowledgement. As she stepped outside, the sun climbed higher, washing the base in honest light. Zephrine Thorne felt something loosen inside her, not because everything was fixed, but because she no longer had to pretend it was. Strength had carried her through violence. Silence had carried her through survival. Now something else waited. Purpose. And purpose she knew wasn't loud. It stayed. It rebuilt. It endured long after the echoes faded. And for the first time in years, Zephrine wasn't running from the future. She was walking toward it. What does redemption look like when no one is watching anymore? The question followed Zephrine long after the dust settled and the reports were filed. It lingered in the empty spaces, between conversations, between decisions, between one breath and the next. Redemption, she had learned, didn't arrive with ceremony. It crept in quietly, disguised as routine. Weeks passed. The base returned to its rhythms. New rotations arrived. Old damage was repaired. The world, relentless in its need to continue, moved forward. Zephrine stayed, not because she was ordered to, but because she chose to. Her rank had been restored on paper, but she didn't wear it like armor. She worked alongside crews, taught without commanding, listened more than she spoke. When people addressed her, it was with respect now, but also with curiosity, the kind that wanted a story. She never gave them one. Not the kind they expected. Because the truth was never clean enough to fit into a briefing slide. One evening, she stood at the edge of the hangar, watching a new technician methodically inspect a weapons system. The young woman moved carefully, a little tense, trying to do everything perfectly. Zephrine recognized the posture immediately. She stepped closer. "You don't need to rush," she said gently. "Accuracy lasts longer than speed." The technician looked up, startled, then nodded. It was a small moment. But small moments were where change lived. Later, alone, Zephrine removed the patch from her uniform and held it in her hands. The black and gold had faded further, edges softened by time and sweat and survival. It had once defined her completely. Now it felt like a memory she no longer needed to hide behind. She didn't discard it. She placed it carefully in the notebook and closed it. That night she wrote again. Not names, not dates, but a thought she had avoided for years. I stayed alive for a reason. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't triumphant. It was honest. On her final day at Vanguard, Zephrine walked the flight line one last time. Blackwood stood nearby, arms crossed, watching the sky. "You heading out?" he asked. "Eventually," she said. "There are other places that need fixing." He smiled. "They always do." As she walked away, no one saluted, no one stopped her, and that felt right. She didn't need recognition. She needed meaning. Years later, someone would tell her story wrong. They always did. They would focus on the patch, the helicopter, the firefight. They would miss the months of silence, the discipline of restraint, the strength it took to be overlooked without becoming bitter. They would miss the truth. That dignity doesn't demand attention. It doesn't announce itself. It simply acts, quietly, consistently, without expectation. And sometimes, that is the most powerful thing a person can do. Zephrine Thorne walked into the future without looking back. Not because she forgot, but because she finally understood what she had been carrying all along. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.